He's one of the top recording session drummers in Nashville. Now he's out on the road with Kenny Chesney. Nick Buda sits down with me to discuss that and share some behind-the-scenes stories of recording with Taylor Swift and Dolly Parton in this episode of Drumheads and Tales. Nick Buda, welcome to Drumheads and Tales.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Talk to me about growing up in Cape Town, South Africa.
Yeah, well, I was born there, and there was so much varying styles of music surrounding me when I was growing up. Not that I realized it at the time, it was just my world. But, my aunt was a singer-songwriter, sort of a young pop star in South Africa at that time. And this is, pre-internet, so it was absolutely just in South Africa. But so she was more, pop-based European-American style music. And obviously we got everything very much later than the rest of the world. But obviously Michael Jackson was still a huge influence when I was a kid, Stevie Wonder, things like that. I was definitely more that way inclined. But then around town, you would have a lot of sort of either Afro pop or a lot of these African rhythms involved in these bands that I would just happen to hear around me. So it turns out it influenced me, even though it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't running in the direction of that, but it was just all around me as I was growing up, so yeah.
And how did you get to the States?
So apartheid, mid-'80s, that was, obviously everybody knows about that. That was around then. And my mom was very anti everything that was going on with that. And had it continued, and had I turned 18 in South Africa, I would have had to join the military. She was definitely not going to have any of that. So because of my aunt being in the music industry, we decided to, we just got out and we came to the States. They had some friends that had moved to Nashville a couple years before, and at that point, Nashville was a very small town, and they said, you're going to love it, and it was also not New York or LA. When we moved, we literally picked up and moved, so not particularly legally, and Nashville was sort of under the radar, a little more inconspicuous, and that's where we ended up. We moved from Cape Town to Nashville in '86, so it was sort of a shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who were some of your early drummer influences?
I would say that for most of my life, I would say I've had sort of a top 5, and some have interchanged in there, but I'd have to say Gad always, Picaro, Vinny, Carlos Vega. I'd say those absolutely have always been in there. Obviously, Steve Jordan, there's Richie Haywood. I'm thinking of other guys that I was heavily influenced by, because my whole childhood learning to play drums was playing along with the music I loved. Right. Whether it's Little Feat, James Taylor, Sting, but then also
Dave Matthews.
Some Dave Matthews for sure. By the time I was in college, Carter was I was like, holy cow, you can do all this stuff in pop music. I love it,
Yeah,
So I was all over that. And then, but also, I was into Metallica, Van Halen, all that stuff. It was a complete spread of things, and I would play along to all of it. And that was sort of whatever I sound like now. It's just parts of it are coming from all of that, Yeah.
Then at some point you went to Boston to attend Berklee.
Yeah.
And I understand you had a conversation with Vinny before?
Before, yeah. So I went to go see Sting when he came to Nashville during my senior year in high school, and I knew somebody that was in that camp. He was actually a journalist that was doing a biography on Sting, and I just bold, I went to the backstage door and said, "Hey, I think Vic's waiting for me." Like, he had no idea I was there. But anyway, he did come and get me. And all of a sudden, I'm in a room 20 minutes before the band's going on with, you know, Sting and Vinny and Dominic. And we just started yapping about stuff. And, you know, obviously Vinny was one of my idols. And Sting, you know, was just there. Yeah. He didn't know much about Berklee. He knew about the Berklee in California. He didn't know about the School of Music. So Vinny was telling him about the whatever, and I talked to Vinny about his time there. And I already knew, I pretty much knew I wanted to be there just because I didn't want to stop playing drums. Right. I didn't want, like, I wasn't going to let school get in the way of, yeah. I was like, if I can actually do this and at school, that's great, you know. And it just so happens after my first year at Berklee, Sting sent his kid to the Berklee summer program. Yeah. So I'll take credit for that. Yeah, but yeah. So that was the sort of the cherry on top to going was that.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So after Berklee, you eventually moved down to Georgia to play with Colonel Bruce Hampton?
Yeah. So I got done with Berklee. I actually came back to Nashville for a couple years because a guy named Matt Gaden, who I had actually done a couple shows with in high school, but he wrote Everlasting Love and a couple Crazy Mama, and some other big hits, and he asked me to come play a couple shows with him at that point. So I moved back to Nashville a bit, did that, kind of integrated, did some rock sessions in Nashville, and then got the call to do the Colonel Bruce thing, which another thing I played to while I was in high school. I played along with those Colonel Bruce records. So yeah, I went to Atlanta and got to use.
Who was in the band at that point?
So it was a guy named Bobby Rogers, who was an instructor at Berklee at the time. He quit Berklee, moved to Atlanta, where he's originally from, and then he was the one that got in with Bruce and then called me and said, "Hey, you got to come over here and do this deal." And then a guy named Ted Pecchio, who's from Ohio, and he and I are still very close friends and work together a lot in Nashville. But Ted moved to Atlanta, and that's where I first met him, and that was my experience. That was I came out of Berklee, just did a little bit of schmoozing around Nashville for a while, and then put all my Berklee stuff to the test with Colonel Bruce, but really got the biggest education out of those 2.5 or so years that I was with Bruce. I mean,
that must have been a great experience.
It was mind blowing. It really was. Just the amount of lessons that he had to teach that I was honestly too young to fully grasp, that now, I mean, I think about it, comes up all the time, that stuff, and I can always go back to something that he said. Yeah. And I couldn't, I was too young and too egoed back then to, like, what's this old guy talking about? But now, yeah, honestly, there isn't a week that goes by that there isn't something that happens that I miss that guy. I kind of assumed he'd be around forever. So yeah, he was a big part of that time.
A jam band like that has a lot of friends. You must have met some pretty cool people on that tour.
My idols. I got to play with Richie Haywood. I mean, we did a 2-drummer night on more than one occasion because he was in town while we were playing. I'd set up a second kit and then we would play together. I mean, it was crazy. And then obviously I wasn't huge fans of Fish before that, but I mean, particularly then, they were so huge. They would come and just to sit in with us at a show. We'd play some concert hall, some whatever. And it was like the Beatles showing up. I mean, girls were screaming the surge towards the stage where people were getting crushed on the front because it's just mayhem because a couple of the guys from Fish walked on stage, you know. So those kind of experiences. And then, I got to play with, obviously, a bunch of folks out of Allman Brothers, Derek Trucks all the time, Tedeschi all the time, you know. I mean, it was a great, that world, it was such a perfect thing for my mid-20s to just be the sponge taking all that stuff in. These festivals we would play, all like George Porter and all that. I mean, it was just on and on with crazy, free musical thinking. You know, it was a great time.
At the end of that, you moved back to Nashville.
Yeah.
And decided to become a pretty serious session drummer.
Yeah, so I, that kind of came to an end. There was some drama that came up, and I was like, I'm out of here. And my friends that had been in Nashville the whole time, obviously had moved up their ladders, and so I went back. That was sort of one of the big crossroads in my career was L.A. or Nashville at that point, because I had some friends in L.A. too, and I just thought, well, I know Nashville, I know what I'm doing over there. Let me figure out what it is I want to do. And I very quickly got into a tour. I was about a month back before I got on playing with this great singer named Cindy Thompson back then, and she was having success. And so all of a sudden I was in the country world, never played country before, never been in that world before. Here's a guy out of the jam band, Colonel Bruce, heavy chops gig, coming into something that really requires a lot more restraint. And
I was going to say the transition between going from a jam band to straight pop country.
Pop country, and all of a sudden I'm playing, I've got loops in my ears, I'm playing to clicks. I'd played to clicks before, but never in that scenario.
Yeah.
And it was a little freaky at first, but then it kind of became second nature. And thankfully, the guy that hired me on that first gig got me and understood where I was coming from and wanted me for not being a country guy, and then dialed me back a bit, because we were close enough friends that I could go to him and say, hey man, when I've overstepped, because I mean, I was definitely doing some stuff that doesn't, not supposed to happen maybe, but it was fun. And then occasionally be like, maybe we pull it back a little bit. Like, I got it. You know. So it was a great experience. And then anyway, that gig ended. I did a little more touring after that, but I realized I didn't want to spend my whole life committed to touring. I didn't want to have to go on the road as a way to make money. And I loved all my idols. They did all the things. They did the records, then they did the tours. You know, in Nashville, there was such a division between the touring drummer and the live, or musician in general, or the live musician, studio or live, that I didn't understand why I would need to pick. I like both. I understand there's a difference in how you approach them, but why can't we all do that? You know, so I did dive into the studio thing, while also maybe subbing gigs on weekends and obviously playing around town a ton. Right. You know, and it was slow. It was slow going, but it was a very extraordinary story. I got very lucky in that I happened to start sessions with this producer named Nathan Chapman, and he liked using just a little core. It was me and a bass player and the engineer at the studio, and Nathan. And Nathan played pretty much everything. And we started just doing demos, and Nathan was trying to find his way through demos, basement demo kind of things, whatever, and bringing in these writers to try, like anything he could do to try and get to being a producer. And one of the writers was Taylor Swift, and so that led, I mean, I'd only been doing demos. I'd never done any kind of master recording, you know, and then all of a sudden we're getting paid master rate to record these Taylor songs. She was 15. Nobody thought anything really about it. I was just psyched to get paid more to do these sessions. Like, wow, we're actually making a record. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us thought we would ever hear it, you know. I mean, not that it wasn't good, but, you know, what are the chances? And then all of a sudden we start hearing it on the radio, and then all of a sudden she starts winning these little radio contests, like matchups and stuff between her and more developed country artists. And then all of a sudden there was this thing, and it was literally the first major record thing I had done in Nashville, you know, and then it went from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the story that you have told before about Big Machine.
Oh yeah.
When the second Taylor Swift album was going to be made, they were going to bring it somewhere else, right? She actually stuck up for you guys?
Actually, it was actually the first one. They did take it somewhere else. They initially wanted her recording the record with a more well-known producer, and that's what had been going on. And then Nathan came in. She came in and did these songs with us, and loved it, and that's the way she wanted to go. And went back to her label, went back to Big Machine and said, I don't want to do this thing, which they were a good halfway through or more of this record. Like, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do this instead. This unknown producer with these unknown players. And they were like, absolutely not. You know, that's not going to happen. And she completely put her foot down and said, I'm not doing the other thing.
That's pretty brave of a 50-year-old.
Incredible. And the fact that she actually had the preference. Forget about putting her foot down for whatever reason, but she actually got the vibe like, I like this vibe.
Yeah.
I wanted to do this.
And I would think that somebody at that age could be intimidated by the Big Machine.
Needing to do what they say, you know, and all that. Yeah.
That's good for her.
It was pretty great. And so, the one thing led to another, and we finally actually recorded that record, but they only would allow us to do like 3 songs at a time. It was almost like give enough rope to hang, and then assume that it's going to fail,
Yeah.
and then be like, okay, let's try another 3. Let's
Yeah.
see, and then the record was done. So maybe part of that was also the reason why we were like, well, who knows what's going to happen with us, but at least we're getting to do it,
And you ended up doing the 4 country
The first
albums.
4, exactly. Yeah, we did. When we went in for the second one, for the Fearless record, which I still love. I still love how that record came out. I love the sounds on it. I mean, the second, third, and fourth record, I think all the drum sounds were just great. I mean, the whole record sounded great, but oftentimes in country, drums just end up getting squashed. By the time you hear the final product, they've got just layers and layers of things on there.
Yeah.
And so the drums end up coming down to this space. And to me, and you lose a lot of the dynamics and a lot of the intricacies, ghost notes, all that stuff kind of go out the window, But man, those records sounded good. So when we went into the Fearless record, it was the first time the band, like we all went into the studio knowing that this was going to be a multi-million copy selling record, and that to us was like, wow, we haven't even played a note yet, but this thing is going to sell millions. How cool is that?
And you learned a new phrase, international pay or rate?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All of a sudden, all these different avenues of money opened up. I was like, this is great. I had no idea this was a thing. Here I am being concerned about whether we're making, double scale on the session or not. And it turns out, well, actually, it's not really as big a deal as you think it is compared to if the artist is going to sell like that.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
So, yeah.
What is it about being a session drummer that you like so much?
A couple things. I love the craft of making it better, of creating something within the tune. You have the song. The writer comes in. They have essentially a skeleton of a tune. I love the fact that we get to add our thing that takes it to another level, changes even the direction of things here and there. The arrangement might change based upon what's happening in the playing. The singer might change how they're singing based upon what's happening with the drums. I know I'm going to be listening to the singer first, and that's where those parts are going to come from. I love that musical discussion that happens when you're starting with a blank slate. And then the other thing I love about it is that it's a piece of history. We play these shows and it's great, but when the show's over, the show's over. I mean, yeah, the recording's over, but if they don't come out, that doesn't matter, right? With these records, that's out there, My kid has been she's 8 and she's about to be 8, and she's been a Taylor Swift fan for the last couple of years. I mean, I know more Taylor Swift now than I've ever had in my life. But it's cool that when she goes back and listens to the records I played on, I did that a decade more ago, and it's still a part of what she loves to listen to, as well as whoever else. And that's cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about winding up with Kenny Chesney. I mean, was it tough to go back out on the road?
Yeah, in ways it was, So I had not that I wasn't into going on the road. I just didn't know of a gig that I wanted to go out with,
There must have been something about this gig that
Well,
you said.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, when I first got called about it, it was completely out of left field. I had no clue that call was coming, and I also I knew who Kenny Chesney was, but I didn't really know who he was, like who he was here, and what the vibe of this camp was. I had no idea. He was just a country dude in a hat singing. I didn't know really any of the songs, anything. And so I was skeptical because I've done gigs before where I've been playing in the middle of freaking nowhere with music that I don't necessarily have any attachment to.
Right.
And that doesn't work for me. Listen, I'm lucky, I'm spoiled, call it what you want. I've been lucky enough to play mostly what I love. Mm-hmm. And I don't love being out away from home doing stuff I don't love. And that's what I was worried about with this. But there were players in the band that I've been friends with forever that I trust their musicality, and they've been doing this gig for a while. And I thought, well, I should check it out. And that was the reason. It was because of who else was in the band. That was more the reason I checked it out. And then obviously after meeting Kenny, after doing it for even just the rehearsals, as soon as I stepped into the first rehearsal, everybody was so nice and cool and obviously really good at what they did. Mm-hmm. And I just love that that's the level. Like, the level is really high, but nobody is bragging about it. We just do what we do, and it's great. It's great. this is my third year. We're 5 gigs away from the end of this tour, and as much as I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get home and get back to a regular schedule, I still love being out here. And I've never been with anything for more than a year, like more than a tour's length or something, you know, for the most part. So yeah,
That says something about this camp.
Completely. And what's awesome is that this whole band feels that way. You know,
Yeah.
we get on so well together. It's great. Yeah, it's really great.
Tell me about your first gig with Kenny. I think that's a cool story.
Yeah, man. So it's coming out of the pandemic. They hadn't played in 3 years. And Kenny loves, I mean, being on stage, that energy. I mean, you hear him talk about it during the show, but it's absolutely true. He loves that. And so he was so ready to get back out there. And the first gig was in Tampa at the Buccaneers Stadium. And we had spent 6 weeks rehearsing. And, you know, it's kind of like this. I know there's this thing coming up. And it's also an incredibly physical gig. It's maybe the most physical gig I've ever done. So I know it's tough to play through this set. I mean, it's funny because now we're so seasoned. We've been doing this whole tour. But I remember how tough it was back then. Even the first 40 minutes is the big, like, you're cold coming in. You try and warm up as much as you can, but it's still physically trying. And then you've got 40 minutes of straight. You don't stop between the songs. You don't have a break. If your arm starts cramping because you haven't warmed up enough, you just have to play through it because there is just no slowing down, and it's all heavy. It's all big, heavy muscle playing. So anyway, knowing all of that stuff and then being back there behind the big screens when the intro video is coming on and just being like, I could screw this whole thing up. I could sink this ship like that, you know, thinking about those kind of things and the nerves and all that sort of stuff. And then we did great. We got up there, and it was, I mean, the first time sitting behind the kit and looking up at, you know, 55, 60,000 people. That's good. That's the first time I'd ever played a stadium.
Yeah.
I'd never even been in the opener band of somebody at a stadium. I'd just never been in a stadium before. And so sitting down and being, wow, that's amazing. And I still do when we play the big play. I mean, even when we play these places, which we're playing tonight, you know, we're in Maine, and it's an amphitheater, and it's not as big as the big places. It's still packed, and it's awesome. I've done plenty of gigs where the band outnumbers the crowd. So anytime we get to be in a place and it's packed and people, that energy, they're so ready to hear it, is awesome. But when you're in front of 60,000 people and it's like that, it's intense.
The energy must be amazing.
Yeah, it's intense.
You also played with Dolly Parton. Tell me a Dolly story.
Oh, I did some of her. I've recorded with her for a while, and then she. There was a year that she went without a drummer, and they played to tracks, and I was the one that played on all the tracks that they played to for her live show, which was bizarre to see one of those shows and be out front hearing myself play, but it's, you know, it's all tracks. But I will say with Dolly, first of all, everything that you hear is absolutely true. Nicest, sweetest, and not just faking it, like she is the sweetest person. But one thing that blew me away about her was in the studio, we would do a take. It would be good, but we would want to change some things, but she wouldn't have to re-sing it. She could go in and listen. We could use the vocal that she just did, and she would want to sing everyone because she wants to be a part of the creative process the whole way, which I thought was awesome because a lot of artists wouldn't do that. And the other thing is, after not seeing her for a while, I did a bunch of the talk shows. That year that she didn't have a drummer and she was using the tracks, when she was doing the talk shows, they asked me if I would do those with her to have a drummer on those. And she would come up every time she would get to the gig. Obviously, she had her handlers and all the stuff she got on stage, but she would still come up, hey, Nick, it's great to see you again. Just the coolest. Yeah. No, she's awesome.
I know you love a challenge. What has been the most difficult job so far? Was there a session or something that you said, holy
You know
shit.
what? I would say I've done some sessions where they're using not just like the Nashville number chart, which is what we're used to playing with all the time, but where they're using actual notated paper. Like when I've done film scoring sessions, when they're doing stuff, I've done some things for Disney and some other things where it's sort of a rock thing, but they're also timing it to other things going on in the song, and you're reading the actual notes that are happening. I know people like Vinny can do that, like they're not even like in their sleep, but that's not the thing that we do normally. So I'm not as in practice, and that when I sit down and I'm folding out the chart, and my heart be like, oh shoot, what's happening here? That can be stressful. I get through it and it's fine, but it can be stressful. Occasionally, Christmas sessions, like doing a Christmas album, can be a little challenging. Not necessarily as stressful, but definitely challenging because those tunes are a little more heavy than your regular whatever songs, to play. But if I had to zoom out a little bit and answer that question, I would say the session scene in Nashville was overall a pretty intimidating process to have to navigate and then learn how to be the best me that I could be on sessions when you're working with different producers, and all the different political sides of what that process is and how to approach that as a player. I mean, you could talk about that for a long time. That's its own thing. So thankfully I'm in a really great place with all that, but I know I could easily see how players could kind of fold with different types of intimidation when it comes to recording.
Speaking of a challenge, did I hear you played on a Jeff Beck tribute?
Oh yeah,
recording.
Yeah, it was a couple years ago.
Did you do the whole record or a couple songs?
It was different guitar players in Nashville, so they picked their songs. It wasn't off of one record. That was challenging. Yeah, I mean, just in the fact that it took time.
What song did you do, or songs?
I did the whole show.
Oh, you did.
And I can't remember all the songs, but yeah, we did. It was me and the bass player played the whole thing,
with
and then which was actually Tim, who was the guy who played on a lot of those Taylor records. Yeah. Yeah, it happened early in the year, and it was actually right before this gig started, or maybe it was beginning of last year. Maybe that's what it was. I can't remember. But it was in like February, so it was when things were a little slower, and I had time to be able to sit and really, because you can't chart that stuff. You just have to learn it.
Yeah.
There's so much of that's you don't want to have to be relying on reading that. That's about that's just about having it together. It was a lot of fun. I love those sort of challenges because that kind of playing just doesn't happen in my regular world, so it was fun.
You have a country gig now, but if you could pick any gig, what kind of music would you like to play?
That's a tough question, because if it's just about the type of music and not about anything else about the gig, it's hard to not go with a one of two things. Like the Tedeschi Trucks kind of thing, where it's that funky horn section, that type of band, big 12+ piece band with the singers and the horns and the whole. I love that idea. That's great. The Sting type thing, where it's pop tunes but great melodies, great arrangements, great things, throwing in also like classics that I grew up with from the Police and all that stuff. I mean, that would be pretty neat too. But I got to be honest, there's so many things I've heard about so many gigs that bring me back to, like, I might have just won the jackpot with this gig, because some of the songs, I'm sorry, but some of the songs when you get down to it are completely silly tunes, but we still have so much fun playing them. Like, we'll turn them into something that is so Stonesy or
rock out.
or just straight big rock, exactly, like in all the fun ways, So it's I'd have to come back to this one. Yeah.
What is the song on your YouTube page called "Messing Around at the Loft"? So that's your studio, right?
Yeah. So yes, the Loft is my studio at home. I do a fair amount of tracks there for artists, writers, all over the place. It's the cool thing. Before I get to the song, it's a cool thing because I'll get somebody who just saw that I played on something, who knows where they see me from, but they could be anywhere in the world, and they'll send me an email saying, hey, I've got these songs, and they'll send them to me, and I'll play on them, and it's cool to have that kind of, that scenario. That, I don't know if I think I may have just made it. Sometimes just I'll sit
around.
Yeah, if I've got some time, and I feel like, whether it's a groove that I have in mind or something, I kind of make it out of preset, samples and stuff like that in Pro Tools, and I kind of create a little track and for me to play to, and then that's what happens. I think that's what that is.
We're going to go out and check out your kit. You've endorsed Noble and Cooley Drums.
Yes.
You've been with them for a while?
Yeah, 7 or 8 years or so. And I've never really needed an endorsement of the drums through my life. I've just had my drums out on the road if I've been out on the road with somebody, or Session World is Session World. We're in rooms. It's not like it's not great pictures from sessions. It's just, here's another kit with some mics on it, and that's what that is. But Noble and Cooley came to me, and I'd always been intrigued by them. And since I've been with them, I love the family approach to making drums, or just to the art of it, and they are most certainly that. I think 7 or so generations of that family making those drums. I mean, those are the oldest drums made. The snare drums during the Civil War were Noble and Cooley drums. It's unbelievable, and they're still making incredible drums. And now I feel fortunate that I get to put that name up on these big stages. I think it's really cool. And then of course, our front of house guy is a just absolute incredible sound guy, more than sound guy, incredible guy. But I was worried. I was like, I hope these drums hold up to whatever he's used to, whatever that is. And he's just blown away by them. And that's just such a great relationship to have, where he's loving everything that's coming out, and I'm loving what he's doing to him, So yeah, it's great.
That's great.
Yeah.
Last question. What would you say to an 18-year-old who wants to be a professional drummer? What's the best path?
It's hard, and I feel like it's only getting harder. I mean, I didn't have, when I was coming up, I didn't have the social media aspect of it to have to deal with. These days, everybody's got way more insane of a setup than I had when I was coming up. Even when I started my studio at home, I don't feel like it was as serious as some of these guys with cameras and the mics and everything. But beyond that, you still have to get out and play. I think you can get yourself somewhat known by doing the Instagram, YouTube thing, but as a player, you got to get out on stage. Yeah. And I lived. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but I essentially lived at certain clubs around town because I was playing there so many times with different artists. And that's the other thing. Play with different artists. Figure out, like, if somebody calls you and says, man, I've got a 10-song set tomorrow night, can you do it? figure out how you can get to a place where you can confidently say yes. If it's charting tunes and being comfortable, being able to read charts live where you're not just glued to the chart, but you can actually play with the band and have your sort of safety blanket where you don't have to memorize everything because that just takes too long. Be that guy, you know, or girl, and be able to be at that level where you can bring it no matter what the scenario is. I think no matter what your age is, just get in there and do it. I mean, I feel like the being at home and it only goes so far, you know. All these YouTube guys that I think are just like incredible drummers, can they play a whole song? What are they going to be like on stage with the band? What's it going to be like when there's a ballad and they're not doing any chops? What's the scenario? Like, is the pocket cool? I don't know. It's like I can see some of these guys be like, mind blowing. Like where I thought Vinny was, as an example, when I was young, a guy that was blowing my mind. Nowadays, you've got guys that I don't even understand how they're doing it. But what's it like to watch them for a show? You know, for 45 minutes. You know, so for somebody young getting out there. Get out there with different people, play lots of stuff. Yeah.
Nick, I really appreciate you taking the time to,
absolutely.
To take some questions before your gig.
Yeah, man, it's really good to meet you, and I'm flattered to be on this. Yeah.
Cool. Cheers.
Cheers.